I asked you what the first deep sky object that you really saw was. Let's take a look at the responses and go through some of your comments. Not surprisingly, 30% of people said that M31, the Andromeda Galaxy, was their first deep sky object. Andromeda Galaxy is the closest galaxy to our own Milky Way, and from a really deep sky site, it's actually a naked eye object and is quite easy to see. I can understand why this would be the first deep sky object that a lot of people have seen, and that's primarily because it is so prominent in culture and people understand what it is. It's also really cool to know that what you're seeing up in the sky is another large spiral galaxy that is very much almost a twin to our own, and that there might be someone looking back at you. The second highest response was other, tied at 31%, but the majority of the people that answered that said M42, the Orion Nebula. That was a recurring theme throughout all of those responses. For me personally, M42 was the first light object of my very first serious telescope. M42 is bright and easy to spot, and a really unique object is in the fact that it is such a bright nebula in such a prominent constellation. A lot of people use that for their first deep sky object because everybody's familiar with the shape of Orion, and the location of it is easy to see naked eye, and you don't need a lot of pointer stars to get there, and you can just pick it out and generally point there. It also sticks out very quickly in most eyepieces, so it's really a great first object and very memorable. And also, if you can split the trapezium, which is the 4 stars that are in the center that are in the star-forming region of the nebula that are really what brightens the whole thing up, that's also a great thing to try to do with your telescope the first time you have it out. The next answer at 21% was M57, the Ring Nebula. This is an object that I love to show at public star parties because it's right on the cusp of what people are able to recognize and see. And they can also, when you tell them it looks kind of like a smoke ring, they are able to have that click really easily and see what it is. That is another deep sky object that's pretty easy to find simply because it's near Vega, which is very bright, and the constellation Lyra is also easy to spot in the summer sky. Finally, at 19% was M13, which is the best globular cluster that we can see in the northern sky. And this is another deep sky object that is placed well in a constellation, in the constellation Hercules, in the keystone portion of it. And so it's relatively easy for you to find, and even in a finder scope like a 9x50 or a 6x30, it really shows up easily. And if you're somewhere that's very dark, light polluted, M13 can actually be a naked eye object. So that's another really great first time object. I really like focusing through M13. If you just barely tweak your focuser, you can really get the depth of that globular cluster, and it's a really cool, great early on object. So several people left really interesting and engaging comments, and so I want to read some of them and talk through them a little bit. The first one is Sharp Things in Space 9721, who answered the Orion Nebula. They saw it with their friend's cheap Tasco 70mm refractor, but it still looked amazing. Out of the 6 friends to try astronomy across 3 decades, they're the only one who's standing. Those little 60 and 70mm refractors that many people had in the 90s and earlier had really great optics, and generally the weak point on those was the very wobbly mounts. I personally started with a 60mm Meade with a .965 diagonal and eyepiece, and the optics on that were, again, really good for what they were, but the mount was just so hard to work with. It had the barely usable slow motion controls, and it was stiff, and you had to almost move it too far knowing that it would come back a little bit, but being able to catch a glimpse of, in my case, planets and the moon, but also I'm sure it'd be easy to grasp some of these very bright deep sky objects. I could only imagine what seeing M42 through one of those small refractors would be like. Next we have Cake Battered, who said the blinking nebula was the second object they saw in their new telescope. And after 15 minutes of questioning their own sanity, they spent around 30 minutes admiring it and bringing their kids over to check it out. And I did a short on the blinking nebula. This is a planetary nebula that is in Cygnus. It has a really unique feature. Doesn't work for me all of the time, but you can get it to work where it's a great test of averted vision, because depending on your conditions, if you are looking right at it, it almost appears to not be there. But then if you look to the side of it, it just kind of blinks in and out. I was really surprised to see that someone said that this was one of their first deep sky objects that they saw. So really great response. And finally, I'm sorry if I'm saying the name wrong, Kunkad said, I only have a 70 millimeter, 700 millimeter focal length refractor, and they've never seen anything besides Jupiter, Saturn, and our moon. Good Newtonians are too expensive in their country. I actually typed quite a long response back to this person because not only are 60 millimeter refractors very capable instruments, much more capable than I think most people would give them credit for. There are plenty of things out there, deep sky objects, that you can get from very light polluted skies with a very modest telescope. Where I live, I'm very much Bortle 9, close to Bortle 10. There's a shopping mall about a mile from my house that they have lit up at all times of day. And I'm constantly surprised when I go out and use my telescope what I'm actually able to see out there. And so from my own backyard, I've seen M42, Orion Nebula, I've been able to see M13, I recently saw M23, the Dumbbell Nebula. So there is a lot of objects that you can see from light polluted skies. Now granted, they do not look spectacular. When I was looking for M27, the Dumbbell Nebula, I really struggled to find it, because the really challenging part is you could see a lot of these objects, or you can detect them is probably a better word. The hard part is that most of the map in the sky that you would usually use to navigate to that in light polluted skies is totally wiped out. And so finding some of these objects can be difficult because you have nothing in the sky to reference as a reference point. Another good one is the Beehive cluster in Cancer. Cancer is a faint constellation, and it's hard to see or impossible to see in light polluted skies. But if you can kind of make out where it is, that is a nice bright open cluster that I'm sure that you could see in a 60 millimeter refractor. This time of year also, there's 3 Messier objects in Auriga. Auriga is a bright constellation near Orion. It's the Charioteer, and there are 3 bright open clusters right in the middle of that constellation they're definitely naked eye from a dark sky sight, and you should easily be able to find them with a small telescope in even the most light polluted conditions. So I would encourage you, don't get discouraged by the size of your telescope in your light polluted skies, because outside of the planets and the moon, there are plenty of objects that are very visible from light polluted skies. When I was viewing M42 a few weeks ago, I was using a 6-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain, which granted is quite a bit larger than a 60 millimeter refractor, but where M42 was placed, it was directly over where this shopping mall is. That sky is almost totally wiped out in that direction, but I had no problem seeing M42 there. It was very easy to find. And so I think if you go through a list of Messier catalog items and pick the brightest ones, that you should have no problem finding more objects than just the planets and the moon from an urban location. The hard part is finding them. Certainly light pollution isn't getting better for really anybody at all, and focusing on objects that we can see from these conditions and how we can continue to enjoy the hobby even in these deteriorating skies is a critical thing for me, because I think that there's still a lot of enjoyment in the hobby, and you don't necessarily need to drive hours away from home to be able to see things. Thanks everybody who responded to the polls and put your comments out. I really had fun reading through them and enjoyed talking through some of these comments that we had here on camera. I'm looking forward to doing that again in the future. This is Trevor from Night Sky Voyager wishing you clear skies.